All right. Well, following on the heels of passion versus opportunity, as well as do you need to go to college to get a good job? Our next podcast episode details a very important question that many people leave unanswered. And it's this: if you don't know what you want to do for a living, go get a job. Come on into the studio, pull up a chair, let's have a discussion, and as we endeavor to answer this all important question. Yes, and one of my favorite talking points, and this usually throws a lot of people off, is this: we have this preconceived notion. There's this presumption that you're just going to get out of, government mandated, K-12 school, right? The normal educational progress and system, and that automatically, by default, I'm just going to go to college. I don't understand. Well, I have an idea. I have a pretty good idea, as a matter of fact, where it originated from. It's amazing to me how systemic it is. So today's podcast episode, we're going to talk about a very important topic that I love to really tweak people with. All right. And it's: don't know what you want to do for a living? Go get a job. And any job will do at this point. We'll kind of get into it. Now, for those of you who are actually watching the podcast instead of listening to it today, you notice that I'm back in the studio, as well as I am rocking some new swag. I got this hoodie that came in the mail today. Wanted to test it out, see how it's going to do. I got a little bit more time with colder weather before we get to the warmer stuff, and I wanted to rock it and see what it's like. And if you want to support the podcast and everything we talk about here, one of the best ways to do so is to spread the word and wear some of the merch. So head on over to the shop and purchase something, rock it, and know that you're not wearing something that was made in a sweatshop. Now, back to the podcast topic at hand. Don't know what you want to do for a living? Go get a job. This is all predicated on the fact that at the age of 18, if we have a conversation, which a lot of people, they lack the ability to really carry on a substantive conversation in the first place. Part of it's the technological aspect of everything. It's really downgraded our attention spans and our ability to communicate overall. And, the technology and social media in general has certainly devolved into keyboard warriors who are willing to say things over the internet that they're not willing to say face to face. But nonetheless, if we were to have conversations with a lot of people, and at the age of 18, I said, do you know what you want to do for a living? And if you told me no, which is where a lot of young people actually are, and this is not that controversial as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you're 18 years old. The chances that you have worked even a part-time job in this country are probably pretty small at this particular point, for numerous reasons, which we're not going to get into. But the likelihood that you've actually worked any kind of, an abundance of jobs, opening up the categories here, an abundance of jobs just to see what they're like, is pretty minuscule. So because that's the case, if I asked you at the age of 18, okay, well, what do you want to do for a living? And you said, well, I don't know. I'd say, okay, well, this makes perfect sense to me. I expect you at the very age of 18, and if you're a guy, you're probably just thinking about getting with girls. And if you're a girl, you're probably thinking about just getting with guys and different things like that. It's not that controversial to me to expect that you're going to come to me within a specific talking point and say, I don't know what I want to do. It's not that controversial. You don't have any real world experience to speak of. This makes perfect sense to me. And so my recommendation then, and we're going to elaborate on this, but if you came to me and you said, I don't know what I want to do for a living, I would say, that's great, man. Go get a job. Go get a job. That's great advice. Go jump into the workforce, jump into the labor pool, and find a job. Now, those of you who are listening here and listening to podcasts, if you go back to passion versus opportunity, for example, I dismiss, I deplore the question when we just ask it by itself. What do you want to do for a living? And it's asked over and over and over again, as if the answer to that is where we should take our marching orders from. And this episode here is really going to help you understand how one podcast episode builds on the other. Because when we talk about, okay, well, you ask a young person, normally what takes place is you can say, what is it that you want to do for a living? And someone says, well, I want to do this or this or this. And then the educational system in this country, which is, to be blunt, it makes economic slaves out of people. It's broken. Because the idea that you're going to take just that answer that they give you to that question is ridiculous. The follow-up question should be, okay, well, let's see if there's actually an opportunity to do that. Let's have a look. Let's look at the data. Let's look at job openings. Let's look at industry growth, et cetera, to see if there's actually opportunity to do what it is you want to do for a living. And then the follow-up question to that should be, can that opportunity, if it's even available and it's what you want to do, can it support you and what's likely to be your family long term? If it cannot, then we should not be having a serious conversation about this from a career perspective. One builds on the other. And hopefully you can see that. So when we have that conversation and we sit here and have that open dialogue that I hope, if you haven't had with young people, you'll have, at least in your own family, that's the order on those questions. The idea, however, that from a cultural hazing perspective, I ask you what you want to do, you tell me, I say, great, let me find a college or a university that has a program closely resembling that. Don't worry about the monetary ability to pay, or even job prospects down the line. Let's just focus on what you want to do. This is a ridiculous stepping stone. This is a ridiculous conversation. And the fact that we don't have more robust discourse about how ridiculous this is, and it hasn't made it to mainstream, is ridiculous. So if I ask you today, young person, somebody going through a career change, right? Maybe you're young, you're going through a career change. Maybe you're post-college. Unfortunately, I didn't get to you before you actually went. But if I said to you, what is it you want to do for a living? Hopefully, bundled in that question was you using, and I don't have my phone on me to pull it up and show you by hand. I've got a mini computer. Hopefully, you've used that mini computer in your hand to look at opportunity, to look at job growth, to look at projections, to look at where things seem to be growing. And you've used that to inform you. Or simply put, let me wrap it up into a context. You're using the pursuit of opportunity to steer the ship. And that's great advice. But the reality is most people, that's not where they're living. So if I've had this discussion with multiple parents. They've come up to me and they can see my family dynamic and my family structure, where my wife is a stay-at-home mom and I work and different things. And they're asking these questions because all of the quote unquote conventional ways that people seem to find jobs and advice become more and more bankrupt as time goes on. And so they're asking me, well, what is it that my kid should do? Or what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And I would say, does your kid know what they want to do for a living? Or if they're there, I'd turn and look to them and say, do you know what you want to do for a living? And they'd say, no. Already going to deal with the fact we've already dealt with kind of, well, they tell me what they want to do. Let's deal with the fact that you can say you don't know. All right, great. It's not that controversial. Now go get a job. And you should see some of the parents look at me like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's right. Go get in the workforce. Go get a job. Go get a job. Go into the workforce. And here's what's going to happen, okay? You're going to go get a job. And this is the basic tenet for this whole, podcast episode, is you're going to go get a job. And what's going to happen? The chances that the job that you get are going to be this stellar, super job that you love for the rest of your life, slim to none. You're probably going to go, well, this job sucks. And then what that does then is it prompts you to go, what is it that I do want to do for a living? Because this job that I've got isn't it. And that's exactly what should be taking place. Now, in an ideal situation, first off, you dismiss the lie that you got to go to college, get a good job. And then you begin to work, hopefully, when you're 15, 16, 17, you're working summers, you're working evenings, right? You're taking care of your academic stuff, but you're also taking care of your family contributions around the home because you're not a pet. You're not going to get an allowance. You need to get, just for existing, you need to get paid, right, for chores, right, to build a work ethic up. And hopefully then you're also working. So you're getting some experience of having a work ethic outside the home as well as inside. And you're going to work and you're doing your thing. And it gives you a little bit better understanding of what the workforce is, so that it doesn't come about that you're 18, it smacks you in the face and you're like, okay, well, now I guess I got to join the workforce because that's where I'm at. We want to continually ease you into the workforce to get an understanding of what it takes. But this is all predicated on the fact that you look at the abundant lie that is told that you got to go to college to get a good job and go, nah, I don't think so. After all, we have sacrificed an entire generation, and it's primarily millennials, especially younger ones. We have sacrificed an entire generation on the altar of you got to go to you got to go to college, get a good job. That higher education altar, we have sacrificed an entire generation. And the total debt, last I checked, I think I looked at it 2 weeks ago because for the podcast, was 1.77 trillion. That's an astronomical number that you cannot claim bankruptcy on. And if you want, go back and look at that podcast episode and you'll see, especially on YouTube, and I think I've done it on Rumble, you'll see a couple different short videos of people talking about the problems with that associated, with that whole mindset. So if you come to me and you say you don't know what you want to do for a living, I'm going to tell you to go get a job. It's going to begin the thought process. Now, for whatever reason, and I don't know where this particular concept come from, but we have this idea that I want my young person to go to college and I want them to have that whole college experience, whatever the hell that means. First off, that is a piss poor thing to say, because when you truly understand the ramifications of it, I am either I'm paying, which is the parent. And don't even get me started on the idea that it's assumed that I'm going to contribute to my kids' higher educational costs when they're adults anyway, and they're legally liable for their own decisions. But B, that it's a foregone conclusion that you're even going to go. But the idea that as a parent, I'm going, well, you should go because I want you to have this experience. What experience are we talking about? Are we talking about educational experience? I will have a separate podcast down the line dealing with the bell curves. But when you look at the bell curves, one of two things has had to happen. Number one, we've either had to educate to a greater degree the individuals that are going into college, or B, we've had to sacrifice the educational quality of the college experience to allow the massive influx of individuals into that system. Use your imagination to figure out which one we've had to do. I'll tell you what, it's the latter. Okay. Well, more on that later. So if it's not from an educational perspective, then what is it from? From a partying perspective? Why would I want to send my child or my children or my relatives or any young person that I actually cared for into the lion's den where they're going to party hard and they're going to come out probably not knowing either A, not knowing what they want to do, or B, not able to take what they've learned and actually apply it to the workforce. Not to mention all the ridiculous indoctrination stuff that we're talking about. It's college, what college used to be. And again, you can go back and read Andrew Hacker's the book is called Higher Education. It's a critique on the modern education system and how he defends your classical liberal arts degrees where you're going into college and the main goal outside of the educational quality that you used to get was to stretch your critical thinking skills. But you don't get that now. You get the opposite. I don't want to think about your opposing viewpoint. I just want to shout you down and cancel you. And so you're not even getting that. So I don't even know what parents, have this erroneous thought process. Well, I want my child to have this college educational experience. It amounts to nothing. And then what's likely to happen, and we'll compare two scenarios in a minute or two. But the reality is, the scenario that we're going to be talking about does the young person no good. It does them no favors. Now, if you're 18, 19, and you've bought into the hype, the propaganda, and you want to go and you want to get that college experience, basically you're wanting to go and party effectively. Go live on my own, party, do whatever I want. Well, this is a piss poor time to find yourself. Okay? And quite frankly, why would you want to borrow an exorbitant amount of money to pay? Or why would you want your parents? I can see why you would want your parents, because you're a very selfish individual. Don't be that. Instead, take advice from people who are displaying wisdom for you to glean from and go, you know what? What he's talking about is right. This is a piss poor time for me to go find myself. Rather, I set myself down a specific career trajectory. Now, I've already dealt with this in the previous podcast, but if you know what you want to do, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a nurse, you want to be an engineer, those careers necessitate a higher educational track. This episode in particular, I only want to talk to those individuals who don't know what they want to do. First off, don't buy the lie. You do not have to go to college. Next episode is going to piggyback off of the most popular article on the website, bar none, the pros and cons of the trades. I mean, they are robust, and there has never been more opportunity than probably in the next 20 years to be in the trades and establish yourself with a career and make tons of money. But don't waste your time going to college, okay? So let's compare two specific scenarios, and these are all too real, by the way, okay? Scenario number one is the all too common one. And this is, I'm going to graduate high school. I have been fed into the system. I have been told I need to go to college to get a good job. I have been asked, what do you want to do for a living? I kind of tossed out something. Somebody tells me this. These are the programs that closely align with whatever it is you want to go. Let's pursue this track. And then I apply. I get there. I'm taking student loans. I'm taking classes. I don't like these classes because I hardly did any research at all about these things. And my parents tell me, well, just take a class or two until you figure it out. Because if you stop, you'll never go back. So you do this. And then you graduate. And then when you come out of college in 4 years, in 5 years, whatever, you come back home or wherever it is that you're actually going to go. You find out, for the most part, because I forget the data, but it's as astronomically large, the number of people who do not work in their chosen field that they studied. So your college degree doesn't do you any good. It certainly didn't help you with your critical thinking skills. And now you got all this debt to pay back. This is the very real scenario for the vast majority of individuals who actually pursue higher education in the college spectrum. That's where they live. That's where they reside. That's an all too common scenario. And well-intentioned parents have compounded the problem by telling them, you just stay in there and take a few classes until you can figure it out. Because if you stop going, you'll never go back. And this is built on the presupposition that you actually need that college degree in the first place. That's the main problem, is that it's predicated on that thought process. We'll address that latter part in a second. Scenario number two is somebody who has a little bit of wisdom. They've got older people with some wisdom speaking into them. They are using technology to not just be entertained, but they're also looking at data They're looking at career fields. They're looking at where opportunity is. And they're asking multiple people about it. Well, those individuals, rather than jump on the higher educational train, decide, you know what? I really don't know I don't really know what I want to do for a living. I think I'll just go get a job instead. And so they do. And far too often, they are judged negatively, I might add, for doing exactly that. Well, what happens then? They are not postponing their launch into adulthood. They jump right in it feet first. They go get a job. They don't like this job. And it prompts them in their mind to go, I don't like this job. What is it that I do want to do for a living? And that begins to, it's an exponential, it's like compound interest, if you will. Now they're really focused on what other opportunities are out there. They're having conversations and they're actively looking for those opportunities. They want to pursue them. They want to navigate through them. That's what they want to do. And then by the time 4 or 5 years passes, you got your individual that comes into the workforce that lacks, to a great degree, critical thinking skills, just wants to shout people down, want to cancel you, has no real work experience to speak of, and we compare that person with the other person who jumped into the workforce to get experience feet first. Who looks better? I don't have all this enormous debt to pay back. And if they're really, really wise, they reached out to me because I'm going to tell you how to get involved into the trades where you're going to have a long-term career that pays great dividends, that pays you money. You learn a skill. You're getting paid to learn, to be blunt, because you're going to go through an apprenticeship. I'm going to get you connected. And by the time that other person that went to college and bought and bit down hard on that narrative, you're out making journeyman money. You're making, depending on where you're at and in the country, you're making $30, $35, $40, depending on where you're at, an hour. You're doing good. And I don't have to pay the debt off they do. All right. So I don't have to do all of that. Who is in a better position? Who is in a better position? If you said scenario number 2, the guy that went to college, the guy or gal, that went to college and bit down the narrative, then you are drinking the Kool-Aid. And you want it to be that person. But it's not true. It's especially not true in today's economic situation. I've already said this, and I kind of touched on it a little bit. We'll talk about it in greater detail on a specifically different podcast episode. But experience trumps all. It's far better than credentials. Way better. Experience has been undervalued for probably 4 or 5 decades now. And you can see this by companies trying to stave off the change by keeping those who are experienced on their payroll. It ain't trying to get them more credentials. It's trying to keep those people with experience. And that's what everybody needs. I talk to contractors all the time who specifically say, I need people with experience. Well, they got to start somewhere. So the scenario number 1 guy is, that's where it's at. You're going to want to jump into the workforce, especially when you don't know what you want to do for a living. Go get some real world experience to really prompt you to jump into it and go, what do I really want to do for a living? And that should get the gears going. Looking at my show notes here, and I want to have a question. A next question would be, why is it automatically assumed that you're going to go to college in the first place? Well-intentioned parents. Remember at the end of scenario number 1 where I said parents are saying to young people, their loved ones, well, just take a class or 2 until you can kind of figure out what you want to do, because if you leave, you'll never go back. Well, my question is, why is it automatically assumed you got to go in the first place? Maybe, just maybe, you should not go into higher education because it was not for you. It was not for you. See, this is more in depth than we really need to kind of go into for this particular podcast episode. But the thought process was, at least 4 or 5 decades ago, oh, well, look, I think it was I think it was less than 19%. Maybe by the time 1970 was around, it's probably like 15%, something like that. Let's say I'll give it 17%. But that 17% that was, had gone to college and had got out, the idea seemed to be that they were making more money than those, let's say, in the field. It's a bit of a misnomer, and it involves a little bit more data than I'm willing to go into in this particular podcast episode. But that was the assumption, or at least one of them. And so the idea was then, okay, well, if you want to be one of those individuals who makes more money, go to college. It's not true. It's emphatically not true. When you fast forward to today, the vast majority of individuals who are applying for institutions, not only do they get accepted, but they shouldn't be going there in the first place. What they should be doing is going into the workforce and getting some real world experience. All right. And which on the heels of that prompts the next question, which is, what's the harm if we didn't even go? If you don't go, or if you look back and go, well, I didn't even go, is there any harm? I mean, the question is rhetorical. We already know the answer. No, it's not. You don't need to go. Okay? And I and millions of other people who are making a very good living completely separate from it are living proof. No, you don't need to go. In fact, there is no real harm. Let's get down into brass tacks for a second. In addition, and this is a caveat, I didn't have this in my show notes, but we'll talk about this just for 1 second. I don't know where that study was. I had read a study in the past it was a news article that was talking about a study and how a lot of people that go the higher educational trajectory don't know what it's like to fail. And so when you don't know what it's like to fail, you're a piss poor employee for all intents and purposes, because what happens is you can't take constructive criticism. You don't deal with failure in a more appropriate way, not just in business, but in life in general. But if you went and got experience, what ultimately happens is you probably know what it's like to fail. And that's because companies, while they want you to stay there and work, I'm not dependent upon you to pay $80,000, $90,000 for this institutional, economic slavery is what it ultimately turns out to be. Okay. So in the end, if you're a young person, if you are somebody that's, a teenager for that matter, excuse me, if you're a teenager, if you're a young person getting ready to graduate, you've already graduated, if you are a parent of somebody, you've got loved ones who are, they're getting ready to become adults as far as the legal age is concerned, and you have them staring down the barrel of higher education, allow me to ask a question. Do you know what you want to do for a living? If you tell me no, then I'm going to tell you to go get a job. That's what you need to do. You need to go get a job. Any job will do at this point. The ultimate goal is to get you thinking to launch into adulthood, not slow your launch into adulthood, not postpone it 4 or 5 years. And I'll leave off with this. I didn't say this in one of the previous podcast episodes because I was going to make a short out of this, and I still may do it. But on the very end of this podcast, allow me to say this. If you are a parent, or if you are a young person who has been saving money to go to college, hopefully you have not been saving it in one of the 2 specific higher education vehicles where the ultimate goal is to save and use that money for those, educational expenses. Hopefully you've been saving in a savings account or whatever, and here's why. I highly advise you, if you don't know what you want to do or what you want to do, or you're going to pursue opportunity, it doesn't take you into the higher educational tract, then my advice to you is don't go and take the money that you've been saving up instead. And if you really want to make a dent in your future, take that money, parents. take that money, young person, and put a down payment on a house. If you, as a parent, if you really, and think about this for just 1 second, okay? If you push your kids towards, scenario number one, which I outlined earlier, and they go and they take on debt, or maybe you pay some and they pay some, whatever, but they still got debt. They get out, they got to get a place to stay. And I'm just going to make the numbers up, but let's say the house payment is $1,500 a month, excuse me. But then they got $600 a month in tuition payments to make. And quite likely is a rather high interest payment to boot. Now, maybe they went and got, a different loan structure where they have a limited number as far as their interest goes. Maybe it's 3%, whatever it happens to be. They still have to pay that back. So for easy numbers, we're going to say the house payment is $1,500, but then we're going to also add in $600 a month towards tuition. Making it up. Let's go with that. But scenario number two is somebody that did not go to college, went into the workforce, and then that money was used, if they had any money, to put a down payment on a house. And instead of a $1,500 house payment, now they're at $1,200. And to boot, they don't have that $600 tuition reimbursement that they have to pay every month. Now, when we weigh these two in the scales, who has the better situation? Who has the better scenario? You already know who is. So if you're listening to this today and you have young people within your realm of influence, or you're a young person yourself, rather than bite off on the narrative that you got to go to college, if you don't know what you want to do, go get a job, save up your money so that you could then turn around and put a significant down payment on a home instead of paying tuition for a devalued education. And look, if you really like to learn, if you really want to go back and get a degree, then go do that as an adult. You know how many adults I've talked to, or how many parents I've talked to that have, or professors even, that have basically said, when you have to pay for it yourself, you value it more. You get more out of it. You're going to go there and you're going to learn. So if you want to go and get a degree later on in life, well, then pay for it out of pocket. Don't take on tuition and debt for it. And save that money instead as you're young. If you're a parent or a young person, put a down payment on a home. You want to set yourself or set your loved ones up for success, do that instead. All right. So I leave off with this. If you don't know what you want to do for a living, jump on into the workforce. The water's fine. This has been the Wealthy Onworker. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Catch you on the next one.